Okay, now it is my very great pleasure to introduce Katy Tuck, who will be giving our next presentation, following along the themes of detectiveness. So welcome.
It started like most things do, whatever that means. Maybe it was raining, maybe it wasn't. That doesn't matter either. What matters is that it happened and it took me for a ride. If I told you to picture a piece of art that changed the course of your life for a bit, that shook up the humdrums, the doldrums, the perpetual Mondays, or whatever your mother called them, could you? How long has it been? Something that lit a fire under your ass, something that got you pacing the pavement a bit. Now picture what happened before it. Exactly. I was minding my own business, going to art school, looking at the art, deconstructing it for a buck, typing up words like appropriation and objection and other for the boss, and generally not giving a good goddamn. Time had left me bitter, restless, and jaded about the art world. One too many pixelated slides, one too many splattered down self-portraits, one too many reading responses. This is art, and this is you looking at it. They'll teach you how to unravel a mystery you used to keep in your pocket for a rainy day, if it was one. I needed a hero. Cue the dame, Sophie Calle. I came to know her on what I would now call a hunch, but I would have only recognized then it as assignment. 10 to 12, double space, you know the drill. I booked it to the library, uncapped a pen, looked at whatever scrap of paper I had written her name on and shoved it in my crumpled purse, an already overpopulated dumping ground for mangled reminders of my own penchant for obsessive note-taking. I pulled an art book from a dusty wooden 1970s shelf. Who'd have figured I'd just uncovered a roadmap back to a game I'd long since abandoned, soon as somebody told me to sit up straight at a desk if you know what's good for you, to follow the rules. A game I'd probably only ever known in my imagination, the place where it exists still, though now I can trace its existence in the real world. In short, a double game. After cracking the book, I encountered onion layers, the likes of which left my feeble mind reeling, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the top. That is not the top. That is okay. The book I'm speaking of is Double Game. This publication documents an extended collaboration between French artist Sophie Calle and mystery novelist Paul Auster, whose back and forth responses to one another through their respective artistic mediums have yielded a complex intertextual body of work. Because the game can become complicated quite quickly, and because it is a kind of game, as its title indicates, a brief introduction to its players is helpful to its understanding. Sophie Calle is a French artist whose work consists mostly of performance, though it really defies such categorization. An important aspect of Calle's process is the methodical systems that underlie its structure. She self-imposes a set of rules and then follows them wherever chance occurrences might lead her, fearlessly transgressing socially constructed behaviors and boundaries along the way. The structured rules guiding her work function as symbolic stand-ins for the rules that structure society, just as the games she plays represent the whole of life. Though this work does take place within the so-called real world, she delineates her own boundary by naming it as a game, thus giving herself a kind of permission to move freely. In many instances, this involves following others, documenting observations about their private lives through photography and writing, or in some cases, following herself. In this regard, Sophie Calle has come to appropriate the role of a detective in her art, of the ilk you might find in a pulp novel or film noir movie, becoming a kind of stock figure in her own stories, which resemble investigations. However, unlike a novel or a film, her fictions extend into the real world, so to speak, and thus the world of other people, both unsuspecting targets and viewers alike. This fictional artistic double becomes a figure whom she can both embody and follow in order to study her own intentions and urges. Her intent is not to solve crimes, but to investigate the driving forces behind human behavior, provoking questions such as, what makes us excited, and what is it that calls us to action? Calle wants to find the bigger connections in life, moving outward in bigger circles of conclusion and questioning. Her artworks are pieces of open-ended evidence more than they are closed cases, perpetually in flux, reassembled and categorized in the service of some larger investigation of life. The further the viewer investigates it, the more it reveals to the viewer, without ever fully giving itself up. The structure of her artwork, in which the main character is a fictionalized double of the author herself, acting in complicated detective stories led by chance, rules, and absurdist situations, is echoed in the structure of Paul Auster's writing. Paul Auster is a novelist who also writes his own metaphysically spun brand of detective yarns. His stories do not resemble the hard-boiled detective novels of authors such as Raymond Chandler. Rather, the writer borrows the narrative form of the genre, a main character on the trail of some gritty truth, for his own purposes. He uses the archetype of the detective figure to address both the futility of investigating all sides of a story and ontological concerns of our postmodern world. The characters he creates are not heroes who solve specific cases. His main characters become obsessed with their investigations. This obsession usually ends in tragedy, with the death or capture or descent into madness of the main character. In his novel Leviathan, the main characters are writers and stand-ins for the author himself. This leads us to the book Double Game, which represents the intersection of their work. The book begins with a pronouncement of its premise, entitled The Rules of the Game, which reads, in his 1992 novel Leviathan, Paul Auster thanks me for having authorized him to mingle fact with fiction. And indeed, on pages 60 to 67 of his book, he uses a number of episodes from my life to create a fictive character named Maria, who then leads me to live her own story. Intrigued by this double, I decided to turn Paul Auster's novel into a game and make my own particular mixture of reality and fiction. Following this declaration of rules by Calle is an excerpt of Auster's book Leviathan, pages 60 to 67. These are the pages containing the fictional character Maria, whose life is based on calls. These 7 pages are printed on the pulpy paper of the sort found in an actual novel, perhaps a second-hand noir fiction novel? These pages are formatted to the size of a traditional novel too, facsimiles of Auster's original publication. The overall aesthetic effect is of someone, perhaps a detective like Calle, cutting out pages of a novel and stuffing them inside the binding of the book, as though it were a compendium of evidence or a personal diary and scrapbook. Reproduced on top of these pages are the red pen markings of Calle, evidence of her physical interaction with the text. Her real-life experiences inspired the content of the text she is interacting with again from the outside, as if she holds the supernatural ability to move between dimensions. It is an intimate and indexical move to show her marks on the page, crossing out words, filling in facts and details, and drawing boxes around the portion of text about her fictional double with a red pen. For instance, on page 64, she crosses out the location of an artwork that reads New Orleans, replacing it with Venice, the actual location the artwork took place. Art theorist Rosalind Krauss describes the complex layering of Calle's art as an instance of invagination, by which she means the folding of one story within another through the invention of a character who exactly repeats the opening of the first story, thereby setting it off on its narrative course once more. Calle cast herself as this character, using her life as a story within which she initially inserts herself. Many folds later, the result is Double Game. Text inside of text inside of text. The game is afoot. Because the book begins in this way, it signified to me that the work was more than just an artist anthology. Instead, I realized I entered into something more participatory on the part of the viewer, a game. This is in part because of the concept and language of the book, but also because of its structure. For one, Double Game contains a litany of reproductions, all of which call to mind evidence. The red pen corrected markings of Calle, grainy surveillance photography, handwritten letters, and maps with traced routes. Many of these images are accompanied by notes written in spare observational language and prefaced by the time and date in which they were recorded. As a result, the whole book resembles a diary or detective's dossier. In my hands, I felt as though I were holding the artist's personal notebook, and that if I could put together its distinct pieces, following in her path, I might solve this enigmatic game. And indeed, exploring each of the artworks in the book did help me piece together a larger narrative. Though each work of art can be enjoyed independently, the relationship to the whole warrants investigation because Sophie Calle links each work in thematic organization. Rules of game. Following this pronouncement of the rules and the reproduced pages from Leviathan, the book is split in 3 sections. 1, how Maria influenced the life of Sophie. 2, how Sophie influenced the life of Maria. And 3, how to become a character out of a novel. Each of the 3 sections contain a different fold in the ongoing fictionalization of Sophie Calle's life. The first section of the book contains the life of Maria and how it influenced the life of Sophie. Each artwork in this section of the book contains examples of art project that Sophie Calle had not yet made, but which are acted out by the character Maria. In order to be like Maria, Calle acts out some of the projects fabricated by Auster, thus causing more of his fiction to become fact, and more of her work to become truthful, or of all of it to become so layered that nobody can tell what to believe. In the chromatic diet, Calle uses artfully composed color photography to document her act of eating only 1 color of food per day of the week, as the character Maria did in the book, on a day. I ate orange on Monday, red on Tuesday, white on Wednesday, and green on Thursday. She faithfully eats most of the food that Auster lists in the book as having been eaten by Maria, but makes some substitutions for what she lists as aesthetic or other reasons. For instance, on Orange Monday, she adds orange juice to the meal because Paul Auster forgot to mention drinks. Or, in White Wednesday, I changed this menu because I was not satisfied with the yellow color of the potatoes, a dissatisfaction she corrected by adding rice and milk. However, in Leviathan, Paul Auster's description of this project trails off after Thursday with, and so on all the way through the last meal on Sunday. Calle decided to make up her own chromatic palette for the rest of the week by adding Yellow Friday, Pink Saturday, and Full Spectrum Sunday, when she, using the 6 menus from the rest of the week, invited over 6 guests to dine on their respective colors. Calle herself did not eat on the final day of the project, and in her description of Sunday adds yet another twist. Personally, I preferred not to eat. Novels are not so very delectable if you live them to the letter. In one sentence, Calle both undermines her rules for this section of the book and announces her artistic philosophy and humor, and her ability to play with language. This cryptic sentence requires some deconstruction and investigation into other parts of Calle's art. Similar to all her work and to the book Double Game, Calle's work can be broken down into smaller pieces that still reflect the whole. Calle describes the purpose of these artworks in section 1 as attempts to become more like Maria, but she admits to not wanting to completely submit herself to the idea by not eating on the last day because she preferred not to. Here she reveals herself as a postmodern version of Melville's character Bartleby, who would prefer not to acquiesce to the rules. The idea that novels are not necessarily so very delectable if you live them to the letter could be applied to her disregard for the conventional rules and systems in life, which Calle repeatedly challenges through her art. The end of the sentence, if you live them to the letter, is most likely a nod to another one of Maria's art projects, which Calle acts out in days under the sign of B, C, and W, in which events of the day are based on a single letter of the alphabet. The second section of Double Game contains works that Sophie Calle made which later influenced the creation of Paul Auster's character Maria. These works are referred to by Calle as rituals and were made in the years prior to the publication of Leviathan in 1992. In fact, all of the artworks in this section were previously published as 7 separate books. One of the works included in this section is her 1981 work, Suite Venetienne. The philosopher Baudrillard, who wrote the epilogue to the original publication of Suite Venetienne, argues that in order to create excitement, nothing must happen. There can only be the excitement and the potentiality of what might occur. This is how Calle's work builds suspense, and this suspense is a seductive game. The secret must not be broken at the risk of the stories falling into banality. In works like Suite Venetienne, nothing happens except the sublime feeling of tension and anticipation in the viewer. In this, the artist exposes the driving force behind all of her movements. Calle introduces Suite Venetienne. At the end of 1981, on the streets of Paris, I followed a man whom I lost sight of a few minutes later in the crowd. That very evening, quite by chance, he was introduced to me at an opening. During the course of the conversation, he told me he was planning an imminent trip to Venice. I decided to follow him. After experiencing a chance occurrence, having encountered the same man twice in one day, Calle decides to follow this lead. Many people would have shrugged off the event as an uncanny coincidence or a momentary feeling of déjà vu, but Calle approaches the event as a way of turning herself into a private eye and of turning the experience into an art project. Unbeknownst to the man-come subject, whose name is given as Henry B., Calle takes a train to Venice, tracks him down, and photographs him, recording the event from day to day. She writes down facts prefaced by dates and times, such as 11:40 a.m. I sit for a moment on a step. I am wearing dark glasses and a hat. My face is hidden by a newspaper that I pretend to scan. She also records her own emotional reactions to the project in italics alongside these facts. Fear seizes me once again at such a specific depiction of Henry B.'s habits. I'm afraid of meeting up with him. I'm afraid that the encounter might be commonplace. I don't want to be disappointed. There is such a gap between his thoughts and mine. I'm the only one dreaming. Henry B.'s feelings do not belong in my story. If Calle is not after Henry B.'s feelings, then it can be inferred that she is after her own story. But what is this story? Judging from this excerpt, this is a story about her own motivation in life, her desire. For the viewer, Calle's story becomes interchangeable with their own because she or he can recognize oneself in her admissions. Calle uses several tactics to become a detective figure, altering both her appearance and behavior. And though she never explicitly labels herself as a detective, it is clear that she has appropriated the role. She wears a disguise. In my suitcase, a makeup kit so I can disguise myself, a blonde bob wig, hats, veils, gloves, sunglasses, and takes scrupulous observational notes, always recording the time an event or thought transpires, or when some detail about Henry B.'s whereabouts becomes known, and any other relevant information to the case. Though she knows he is in Venice, she does not know where he is staying, and has to track him down through dubious inquiry and exploration. She even goes to the police station and lies about her intentions, claiming to have lost the name and address of the hotel that her friend is staying in. She talks to strangers. She goes through the list of all the hotels in Venice and calls them one by one, inquiring after Henry B. until she finds him. She wanders the Venice streets. She waits in piazzas, knowing that she might be caught, that the man doesn't know he's being followed, that she will lie to the police. If this wasn't art, it would look suspiciously like stalking. All of this heightens both her experience and the viewer's. Though Calle arrives in Venice on Tuesday, February 12th, she does not find Henry B. until Monday, February 18th. The suspense of waiting for both Calle and the viewer is magnified by this gap in time. The unknown, the space between Calle's and the viewer's worst fears and the future, cause a delightful tension in Suite Venetienne. Calle's work recreates this feeling of fear and titillation in the viewer. What might happen becomes infinitely more exciting than what does happen. As humans, one fears the worst, yet desires the secretive. If Henry B. finds out he is being followed, one would expect him to be very perturbed, as the viewer himself or herself might be. After all, what would one do if they found out they were being followed? When Henry B. eventually recognizes her, Cal notes that he attempts to hide his surprise. Soon after she has been caught, she stops following him. She questions why her project has ended. Did my adventure with him come to an end because he discovered me? Because he knows? In society, one expects to have his or her privacy respected to a certain degree. We respect other spaces out of social conventions, but also delight in voyeuristic pursuit. The empathy one feels toward Cal and Henry B. is a double game. One wants to spy like Cal, but to be left alone like Henry B. Cal's art is cause for reflection. Must something be forbidden in order for us to be excited? The excitement the viewer feels is created out of a lack. Too many facts can destroy us, destroy our desire for participation. When an artwork says everything, when it closes its doors, we have no need to look again. Calle relishes these feelings and purposely sets them up in her art, as does Auster. Both use incompletion and semi-factual elements as a way of inciting the active decryption of their narratives by the viewer and suspending the fluidity of a story by leaving it open to further recontextualization. Because Calle and Auster collaborate, they seem to avoid the foregone conclusion of autobiographical work. Much collaboration does this, opening up the artwork to multiple perspectives. The old adage, 2 heads is better than 1, comes to mind. However, by fictionalizing themselves too, Auster and Calle end up with a large team of collaborators to whom they can respond. Calle can observe herself through the filter of Auster and his characters. The reverse is true when Calle includes Auster and hers. His work takes on new meaning and form. Auster can actually observe how his fictions play out in real life when Calle acts them out. Calle and Auster both see their work live on in perspectives outside of their control. By keeping their artistic identities in the hands of another, or just ahead of themselves, they stay ahead of the game, escaping the banality of open and shut cases. The further I researched the work, the more I came to think that I was playing a game with these co-collaborators, navigating UC Berkeley's Kafkaesque underground library to an internal soundtrack of noir mood music. Some pianist in some smoky bar burning up the ivories in meandering, menacing measures for some scrap of sentence that might complete an intentionally unfinished puzzle. A library replete with spinning bookshelves and bare-themed, clothing-clad students who thought I was one of them, a guest pass like a telltale heart. This all felt like another part of a game I was being invisibly led through. Calle's little carrot on a string. I was on a mission. I couldn't help but to start narrating my life in the way that Calle narrates her own, giving strangers sidelong voyeuristic glances, piecing together facts about events in my life as if they might magically reveal something larger about the ways in which I interact with the world. When you enter into Calle and Auster's double game, following their trail of artistic movements, both factional and fictional, you gradually realize you are following yourself. This is true of all our whims to follow, whether it be of art, person, character, book, idea, or otherwise. We seek ourselves. Calle and Auster invited me into a bigger game, the game of locating myself externally, a game of recognizing what underlies my desires, my movements, and my studies, a game of reordering my past in relation to my present, a double game. Following Calle and Auster led me back to myself quite literally. I spent time writing and researching this paper in coffee shops on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, California, located a couple blocks away from my apartment on 39th Street. On November 29th, 2010, around 10 o'clock p.m., I read the following in Leviathan, page 227. He would go to one of the espresso bars along Telegraph Avenue, settle into a quiet corner, and spend an hour drinking cappuccinos as he read. Here I am. Thank you.
Can I throw in a question about the artworks you showed up?
Yeah, sure.
That image, was that her in the portrait with the cats and the owls?
Yeah.
So what the hell is that all about?
Yeah, that was for B. B for Bimbo. Yeah. Those the days that she acted out under like a letter, and that one she was satirizing some French activist that I don't know, but somebody who's taken
Bardot.
who? Bardot?
Bardot.
Oh, the actress?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
She's an animal. Not.
Well, tell me something. I don't yeah. Yeah. Let's see, where is it? But this characteristic of Cal, she's got a great sense of humor, and she's always taking on new identities.
59.
59. Oh, well that's the one.
59. The next one?
Oh yeah, you're right. It says, to be like Maria, I spent the day of Tuesday, March 10th, 1998, under the sign of B, by taking on the appearance of a big-time blonde bimbo. For the model of this photograph, see Paris match of November 2nd, 1989, and the portrait of BB, who has in recent years taken her preference for the cause of animals over that of humans to the point of caricature. And then on the bottom it says, B for beauty, and the bestiary for bat, bantam, bear, boar, bull for bug, badger, bray, bellow, bleat, bark for beastly, bird brain for BB.
Which French book was that, or not?
That was Francine.
Yeah. Honestly, which one was that?
I don't think it was French.
Okay.
Paris Match. Paris Match, 1998.
Thank you.
I bet there's a
Oh,
one in Los
1989.
Angeles that could send that to.
Yeah, sure. November 2nd, 1989.
I can throw you a softball. Rules of the Game, any connection with the famous French movie from the 1930s?
Yeah, her work is related to a long lineage of French artists and authors. Renoir, he had a movie by the same title, The Rules of the Game, which is a sort of comedy of manners, making fun of, social classes. And I think Marivaux, the playwright, it's like The Rules of Love and Chance, I think. And there's a big tradition of this in France. I'm not exactly sure why. It's bottomless. I tried to follow it, but it's bottomless, and it is intentionally bottomless. So, but it's a fun game.
I just love the way that you entered into the spirit of the game and became, a performer in the reading and thinking through of that textual conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I really nerded out in a big visual studies sort of way.
Yeah.
I bought detective
That's
sunglasses.
I mean, as a methodology, and also as a strategy of presentation, just absolutely just right.
Thank you.
I cannot help but ask a question about language. So does she write in both English and French? And can you access both? And do they belong to different categories of the way she writes? How does that figure into the game, if it does? And where do you enter?
It definitely does. I think a lot of times she's presented as a visual artist, but really she's a writer at heart, and I think that's part of why she was so appealing to me, because I've switched over from painting to writing. But usually it's like this. It's usually accompanying photography that's documenting some kind of performance art. I don't know whether she writes in both French or English, I'm sorry, whether they're just translated or not, but I assume so. I think she lived in New York for a while. Yes.
Hi, Katie, thank you so much for that in-depth consideration of the relationship between the author and the author-photographer-artist. One thing that struck me, having been obsessed with Paul Auster at a certain point, I noticed that the book, Rules of the Game, is red, it's bound in red, and that when you held open the larger book with those pages that had been kind of inserted like as though torn from a book, that sort of larger field of paper was red, and that she used a red pen. And I just wanted to mention that there's a book by Paul Auster called The Red Notebooks.
Oh.
Which is about his, about a kind of like several, he claims, you never know, like these kind of stories that are based on these incredible coincidences, just like the one that you describe at the end. Things that sort of he experienced, I think from, when he was living in Paris. So I just wanted to, there's probably something there on Cal's side.
Yeah, I'm still willing to research it.
There's something there on Cal's side. Yeah, and then I also appreciated your placing yourself in the role of the detective. And I wonder if you thought about, the work of the critic, the work of the historian. Like you said, you sort of went, the photograph of, that's UC Berkeley Library, where you had to go into the stacks where, no one had been probably for, months and months. And how that, this process of like going into other people's texts and sort of inhabiting them as a critic or a historian, and then collecting all these pieces and in a way trying to put a story together, about them. I mean, did you reflect on that as a
Oh yeah, absolutely.
weird phenomenon?
There were lots of crazy coincidences. That wasn't just something that I was using in my paper. Yeah, I was definitely thinking about it, especially since I'm sort of a novice at writing papers that are longer than 10 pages, and doing research. So I guess maybe to some people it seems, investigations, and research can be crazy, but it really did feel like I was inhabiting the text. And at the same time, I worked in the Wattis Gallery, and there was an exhibit going on where the walls were shaped like giant books. And not a lot of people came in, so I just felt like I was living in this world of giant books. And the paintings were based off of imaginary paintings in books. So I was thinking about it a lot. I was encountering a lot of strange coincidences myself.
Are they still collaborating? Or was this kind of one period of their careers where they sort of ran together?
Well, Sophie Calle mentions this at the end of the book. I didn't get to the third part just for time reasons, but in the Gotham Handbook, she gets Auster to write out a set of instructions for her to act out for a year, and she does it, but she says in her writing she kind of makes fun of him. She's like, where did he get these instructions? Because he tells her to like smile at people and hand out free sandwiches, and she's like, what AA manual did this come from? And she kind of just makes fun of it, and but she said she's putting up with it because she wants to get a book out of him. So so they have a funny dialogue. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were still collaborating, although I'm not sure.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.